look at some of the reflective frameworks that are actually embedded in the PebblePad platform. We're going to hear a little bit about the different ways that reflection can help support student learning. And then we're going to give you time to just look at a couple of demonstrations, the different ways that PebblePad has been used, and some examples. And then we want to save time at the end to have some question and answer activities. So what is PebblePad? It's our centrally supported institutional platform. Okay, so there are places where you can go for support. It has features that, combined with good course and program design, can actually help students integrate their learning. So not just within courses, although it does that quite well, but it helps them integrate their learning across courses over time, between what's happening in their academic environment and what's happening out in the community world or the workplace with their extracurricular or co-curricular activities. To do this, PebblePad's really good at supporting reflective activities. So instructors can use PebblePad to create and share what we call these one-page templates or a multi-page workbook, and I'll be showing you examples of these, where you can embed content, multimedia content. You can add prompts and questions that you want your students to answer or to at least think about to really help scaffold that student learning. Students can then review the content and they can respond to those prompts and questions in the spaces provided. They're also able to upload evidence of their learning. So instead of just saying that they have achieved something, they can actually upload with it, here's how I know that I've actually learned this. And the responses and work that they complete can be submitted for grading or for you to provide feedback. Another way that it supports reflective activities is through the use of portfolios. So as students get more comfortable with the reflective process, you might want to give them the freedom to create their own portfolios and sort of pull away a little bit from the scaffolding and the prompts. It also supports, as I mentioned, the integration of learning between courses, workplace, and community. And it does this because, unlike the LMS, where at the end of the course, the students will lose access to any work that they have done or any of those useful resources that you may have provided them, through PebblePad, students are able to actually keep that work and they could build on it. So at a program level, you could have them start something in year one, perhaps you're introducing them to a concept, and you could ask them to go back and retrieve that piece in another course and build on it and really interrogate maybe a concept that they may have thought they understood fully, but as you go through the program, they understand that there are a lot more nuances in it. But it really helps them make those connections from the first year to the last year of their course. The other nice thing about it is it is user-owned and learner-centered. And to such a degree that students are able to, after graduation, they can continue using PebblePad. So having them, introducing it to them in the academic environment doesn't mean that as soon as they leave or graduate from the university, they no longer can use it. It's actually a platform that they can use after they graduate. I wanted to emphasize what it isn't. Okay, it's not a replacement of Learn. So Learn has a number of features in it that PebblePad just doesn't do well. So PebblePad is not something that you would want to use for quizzes. It's not where you want to make your announcements. It does have a discussion board feature in it, but Learn has a really good one. So really they're meant to work together and to complement each other. So what I'd like to do now is, I've mentioned the term workbook and templates. I'd actually like to take a minute to just show you a workbook that had been created by one of our instructors, Laura Middleton, for a KIN 418 program, just to show you the depth of what could be done. Okay, so this was created by Laura Middleton. You'll notice that what she has done is she has divided her course up into 12 weeks. The nice thing about PebblePad is she is able to give this workbook to the students, but she doesn't have to have it completed. So what she can do is she can add to week 2, 3, and 4, and 5 as she is completing it. Or if she has it all completed, If she thinks that this might be too overwhelming for the students, you're able to actually say release week 3 on this particular date, week 4 on another particular date. So it is nice to not have to always be starting from scratch. You can actually build as you're moving through your course. The way that that Laura wanted to use it was she wanted to sort of facilitate what she had usually done in the classroom, which was show some content, have some discussion, have the students think about some of the work that they had done. So her workbook then is very much a way for her to provide some content. So the students can go through this. She can embed videos that she might want them to look at. And then at the end, she can have a place where they can do reflections. So she's repeated this format throughout. She gave them a little overview of what she expected the students to do each week. This is a little introductory video where she's just talking about what she'll be doing during the week. She's actually helped guide them, you know, here are the things that you should be doing, so you can create this little checklist to make sure that you are completing the activities that she has planned. She's given them some content, and again, give some content, then she asks them to reflect on it. She's also able to pull reports on this so she can see what the students are saying in these particular reflections. And this might help her address maybe a misconception or something in the class. She doesn't have to give feedback to each of the areas if she doesn't want to, but she could. But by having it submitted, she is able to go in and just see what the students are doing. And maybe this is what she is going to be marking. So in each of her pieces, she has reflections, and this might be where she is, I want you to answer these questions, and then she can go ahead and provide some feedback. So the students are left with this nice workbook, which she actually wants them to be able to use in other courses if they're interested, or when they're out in the workplace working with seniors. And all her feedback, again, is embedded in that workbook. So again, that is, you know, I would say a more complex use of it, but it gives a really nice idea of the kinds of things that can be done in PebblePad. Laura used it in her course. What I wanted to illustrate here is that PebblePad is really good at accompanying the student along the learning journey. So the Student Success Office actually created a workbook that is used to introduce students to university life. So all of our first year students were given this orientation guide through PebblePad. We have examples of students working on group capstone projects. They were able to create a portfolio together, and their peers were able to give them feedback. We have examples of it being used in a number of different courses at the course level. We have examples of it being used throughout the program, examples of it being used to support co-op. And again, just to iterate that once students graduate, they can still continue working in PebblePad to create their portfolios or just to gather evidence of it. So we'll go on to the next one here. And what I'd like to do now is just show a couple of more examples of the different ways that PebblePad can be used to support at various, different levels. So another way that we can use PebblePad is to support reflection. And in this particular case, this is a learning journal that we give to our CTE co-op students. And what we're having them do here is just help them think about what they are doing during the weeks and how they are developing skills and attributes that will serve them well in their coursework and once they graduate. So it's very simple. What were the projects that you worked on this week? What are the resources that you need? What did you try that was successful? What skills were you able to work on? And again, that reflects back to at the very beginning of the term, we actually asked them to develop, talk about some of their challenges that they've faced, strengths that they have developed, and list some of the skills that they hope they'll be developing during this co-op work term. So this journal, again, is completed every week, but it's just a way for them to keep track of what they've done and really think about what it is that they are trying to accomplish. And then halfway through, we actually give them the opportunity to start thinking about how they would talk to an employer about some of the skills that they have developed and how they might use that in a different setting. In another example, again, this is the MSW ePortfolio capstone project. What the instructors in the Masters of Social Work project wanted the students to do is at the beginning of the program to really start thinking about the capstone project that they would have to complete at towards the end of the program. So they gave them this workbook, which they work on while they are completing other courses and going through the social work program. So at the end of the first term, they are asked to think about what some of their capstone ideas might be. The instructor can give them some feedback. Towards the end of the second term, they can talk about a little bit more about how they're actually honing in on what that capstone project is. And then towards, as they get closer to their capstone, they're just a way for them to check in with what they have done and, you know, just keeping them on track with this capstone project. And then there's an area for them to upload their final capstone project. But while they are completing that, they also are introduced to the competencies that the social work folks have to have achieved by the time they graduate. And so in each term, the students are responsible for choosing any 3 of these capstone core competencies and discussing how they know that they have achieved that or they're making progress on it. So in this particular one, the competency is a professional social worker and the values that such a social worker would have. Again, they can upload evidence of their learning. By the time they complete the program, they will have filled in all of these competencies and will have had evidence which is showing how they have actually achieved that. In another example, in the Masters of Public Health, what the program has done is introduce the students to all the different competencies that, again, is associated with the Masters of Public Health work. And students are asked to go through the different competencies and rate themselves at the very beginning. So in this particular one, again, they have to go through and they have to do their baseline rating. So they would say, here's an example of, you know, have I had any experience assessing population needs? They look at the scale. They determine that maybe they should rate themselves as a 2. I'm just going to go in and actually rate myself. This one, so I'll go into the competency area. And so the students can go in, they look at the proficiency scale, they find out what each of those scales mean, and then they rate themselves and justify why they have rated themselves as a 2. And then they confirm. And then they're asked at the midpoint of the program to actually go back and fill this out again. So now they're rating themselves again. They might say, now I think I'm at a 5. They provide justification, but they can also see their history. So as they go through this, they're able to see why they had rated themselves as a 2 at the beginning, why they have rated themselves, you know, now as a 5. So it's going through and they're able to see their progression as they go through the program. And they're also seeing the different pieces of evidence that they have added throughout to show how they are actually progressing at these different competencies. As I mentioned, they're using this throughout the program. There's a practicum that they will fill out in here. They have their baseline, their midpoint. Eventually, there will be their final summary in here. And at the end, they're able to have a nice package of all the different evidences or pieces that they might be able to show or talk about when they graduate on how they know that they have achieved these competencies of a Master's of Public Health program.
Okay.
So not only can the students track their progress on these competencies, what the program can now do is go in and pull reports on these workbooks. So they're able to show if they were up for accreditation to say, not only are we giving our students opportunities to develop these competencies, here are examples of student work that illustrates what our students are capable of doing in this program. So similarly, you could create workbooks that help students, to keep track of the undergraduate degree level expectations or at the graduate degree level expectations, program outcomes. You can also create a professional portfolio, which would highlight some of the skills or some of the highlights that you've achieved, while you're a student. But you can also use it as a staff or an instructor as well. So if you are applying for grants or whatever, you might want to highlight some of the work that you've done in that area. You can keep track of your professional development, continuing education. Again, it's not just for students, it can be used for staff and instructors. If your program has requirements where students have to do or log a number of hours in a particular activity, you can actually do that. And again, it can be embedded into assessment. So you can provide feedback and you can provide grades as well to this. What I'd like to do now maybe is just pass it over to Natalie, just to talk a little bit more about the importance of reflection and how PebblePad can actually support that.
Sounds great. Thank you, Katherine. So right now I'll walk you through, as Katherine mentioned, some of the reasons why you might want to use PebblePad, as well as some of the frameworks as well that are associated with using the ePortfolio tool. Just some considerations so that you have background and context that could help you better understand how the tool can be used, but also to achieve student buy-in so that they'll be able to be motivated to use the tool as well. So really here, it is a tool that facilitates reflection, and PebblePad can be used to enhance a learning experience. It can help also bridge theory to practice. So if PebblePad is used in something like a field course, students can take the theory they're learning in lectures, for example, and integrate reflection into that. It can also be a place to record evidence of a competency, as Katherine mentioned. So things like teamwork, problem solving, and critical thinking. If there are competencies in the program, students can, PebblePad can be used to better facilitate those connections. And really the neat thing about PebblePad is, one of the neat things is it can really foster student agency. As Katherine mentioned, this is something that they can use throughout their program, and even after graduation, it can be something that they hold on to. Perhaps it's something that they want to share with a future employer, or maybe depending on their discipline, something that could be useful to share with anyone else. It's a really neat place for all the evidence to be in a virtual place. With PebblePad, it could also be institution-centered, so something that could be used for assessment of learning. So if you're using it as grading in a course, it could also be viewed as student-centered, where it doesn't have to be for grades, but the student is using it as a place to facilitate reflection. Or perhaps it could be a mix of both. And I'm hoping at this point you're able to see how versatile PebblePad is. So again, here, just to reiterate, reflection as a key step in active learning. So it's not only is it important to engage in observing an experience, it's important to engage and think about them, to spend time and reflect on them. And guiding reflection here is really key. So we often think of reflection as a common sense skill or something that you should just be able to do. But actually, what we read about in literature and in research is that it does take time and investment to know how to reflect. And your role, whether you're an instructor or working as a staff teaching support role, it's important to create those parameters for students to be able to know how to truly reflect. So here there's a diagram called a portfolio pedagogy, and this really walks through the cycle that you'll see in PebblePad. So there's selection, there's action, there's the creation piece, and then the reflection. And this diagram, let me just go back there. Here. So this diagram, we look at literature from Bass and Anon, where they talk about the cycle of reflection and how learning takes place when it includes this inquiry into evidence of learning and reflection on meaning. And one thing to note about this cycle is that the reflection stage is really, really key. So, and the feedback stage is really key. So an example is when a student engages in experience, they create something like a journal entry, for example. They get feedback from the instructor week by week, or perhaps they get feedback from their peers to tell them, okay, like, this is what I noticed in your entry. Have you considered these things, or have you considered perhaps shaping your entry in a different way next time? That feedback we find in the cycle is really key to helping the student not only improve their own work next time, but also be able to think about the feedback they might give to their peers as well. So in addition to this being an individual learning experience, it can be a really great tool to facilitate collaboration as well. This is a cycle that experiential learning cycle that will probably look very familiar to many of you. So this is just another way of thinking about that portfolio pedagogy. Theorists like Dewey and Piaget have all spoken to the learning by doing concept, where you have to do something, observe it, think about it, and then evaluate it, and then go through the whole cycle again. And so often when you hear about PebblePad, you'll almost always hear about experiential learning as well, because it can be a tool to really foster that experience. Here's a different way to think about stages of learning and reflection. And this diagram here is from Jenny Moon's work, where Jenny first talks about the stage of noticing something. So it's hard to reflect on something if you haven't noticed or observed or seen something. So we start with that kind of novice level. And to the right-hand side, you'll see representation of learning, where it's memorization, the rote memory. Often what students maybe enter a university program thinking, okay, like in a first year course, I'm going to memorize these terms. I'm just going to show that I know. Ideally, we want them to be working through the different stages where they're starting to make sense, make meaning, work with meaning, and then go through that transformative learning piece, which a representation of transformative learning is then reflection, possibly where PebblePad would come in. And one thing to note here on this diagram is the transfer of learning is really key. So it could be that you're using PebblePad in perhaps one of a first year or second year course, and you're perhaps prompting students to think about, okay, how might this concept, will I see this again in a future course or in a future year? Or if you're using PebblePad throughout a program, perhaps think back to your earlier years. What resonates with you? How have you grown? So just really wanting to emphasize the transfer of learning here on this slide. Then here again, you'll see probably most of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but we really, really want to emphasize that this is a really important framework in terms of thinking about the levels of understanding that a student goes through. And Peter Pappas created the taxonomy of reflection, which is to the right there, which is based on Bloom's taxonomy. And so in Peter Pappas's work, like he talks about a simple example such as a student reflecting on an assignment in a course, starting with remembering at the bottom there. So what did I do? What was the assignment about? Did I hand it in on time? What was important about the assignment? Where might I use this assignment again? Do I see any patterns in what I did in the assignment? How well did I do? And then what should I do next? So if there's an upcoming assignment that asks the student to pull concepts from a previous one, how might they take that feedback and apply that feedback into the future? So really, from this taxonomy of reflection, it can be used in different disciplines. It can apply to different contexts and to different assignments as well. So what we're going to do now is we'd like to walk you through a couple of the templates in PebblePad and to start walking you through how to access Pebble Plus in Learn. So right now, I'll ask you to go into Learn, and I will just type in the chat here just in case you don't have that. So you'll go into Learn, and you should see at the top navigation bar a link to Pebble Plus. From here, I'll click on Pebble Plus, and you probably arrived at a landing page that looks like this. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go to, you'll notice there's a store, there's assets and resources. There's a lot of terminology in PebblePad. We do have sessions about specific things. So if you ever feel lost, totally normal. But for now, I'm going to go to resources. And from resources, I'm going to click on PebblePad Templates, and please feel free to follow along on your screens as well. You'll notice here a couple of templates that have already been generated by PebblePad that are ready to be used for you. An example I'll show here is the first one. So what, now what? And when you go into a PebblePad template, it'll ask you to enter a title. You can enter a date for the reflection. You can see here, there's an area for you to describe what you have thought, done, or experienced. The so what. So what have you learned from this? How does it relate to your overall learning? And then now what? So again, this is a very, very simple template. If you wanted to create a customized template, you would need to actually build one off of, but you might find that actually this fits your need. You might want to use this one here. I'm going to go back and show you another template. So this is another popular template called the STAR technique. This, as I was going through it, was thinking is a really good tool for students, perhaps if they are preparing for an interview. So if you've heard of like STAR-based questions that often ask you, like, tell us about an experience when you exhibited A, B, and C. This is something that could help the student put their experience into words, something that could help them just to feel better prepared for an interview. So again, you'll see you're prompted to add a title, describe the situation, the task, what needed to be done, what was your role, action, what did you do? What skills did you use? And the result piece, what was the outcome? And in my example of an interview, what do you want employers to know? What would make you shine? And then a reflection that's optional here. A user could add evidence if they wanted to. Maybe it's something like an audio file that is their evidence, or maybe it's a Word doc, anything else they could add here. And the last example I'll show here is just kind of a different way of thinking of using PebblePad. It doesn't always have to be for a course specifically for an assignment. It could be maybe a practical use. So here you'll find there's a meeting template. An example of how this might be used is if maybe a student is working on a group assignment and they want a way to track their work as a group. So again, the title, brief description about the meeting, where did it take place, when did it take place, who attended, what were the meeting outcomes, so what was achieved after your group met together, actions, including a target date, so what are the next steps, just a really nice way to capture visually a plan for the group. Supporting resources, people, books, and journals. So you see it's quite, this template compared to the other ones, it's quite long, but again, available to you. And it's also one thing to note about templates, students can access it on their own as well. So you don't need to necessarily create one for them to use. They have access to Pebble Plus. They can use these templates as well.
Using these templates, I've seen instructors who just in the middle of class will say, oh, can you go to your experience template? Just let me know, what you thought about that last experiment or something, and then they can submit it. So it's a great way to get you up and running quite quickly, with not a lot of work to do in advance. There's Pebble Plus, which is the personal learning space. And then there's the assessment space. So what we're going to concentrate on today is more the personal learning space. And what's unique about this is there's really no difference between what a student sees and what an instructor sees or what a staff member sees. Everybody sees basically the same thing when they're in the personal learning space. The difference happens when you start using Atlas. And so if you're going to be creating resources that you want to share with your course, that's when you would be using the assessment space. If you're going to be providing feedback to your students, that's where you use the assessment space. And there definitely is a difference in the permissions that an instructor or a student would have. But what I wanted to point out on here is this is what the dashboard looks like for everybody. When you go in, you'll see your own name in here. Whenever you want to return to the dashboard, you can just click that little flower that says PebblePad. It will take you back to the dashboard. And when we talk about the burger menu, it's these three little lines at the upper left-hand corner. I guess it looks like a hamburger. And when we click it, that's where a lot of the action can take place. So I'm going to click on my dashboard. And in here, you will see the assets or the resources. Just a little note, we'll go into a lot more detail on this when you actually start using it, and you'll come to a workshop which we talk more about the terminology. But resources are those things that instructors would prepare for students to use. So that would be forms basically that you create that has your scaffolding questions. It gives them fields where students, when you share it with them, can fill it in. When the student fills it in, or when anyone fills it in, it becomes their asset store. So resources basically scaffold the learning. Assets are what a person who fills it in would work on. As you're going through this, there's an easy way for you to find out what you last worked on. So if I go in here, these are things that I had recently been working on. If you click on that link, and you're welcome to go in and poke around while I'm doing this, you will probably not have as much material in here. The Get Creative, this is where you can start creating things. I'll go show you that in a little bit more. Another piece that I really like about PebblePad is they do really focus on pedagogy. And so one of the things that if you click on, what I just did was click on the Learning Center, and you could actually direct your students here. So if you wanted to get a better understanding of what PebblePad is, PebblePad has embedded a number of very short videos. They're anywhere from 30 seconds to maybe a minute or something. But you can introduce yourself to some of these things about PebblePad, how you navigate through it, what are some of the important features, but you can also send your students here as well. And when I was talking about the focus on pedagogy, not only do they talk about how to use PebblePad from the technical points, they also have little pieces here on reflection. So there's a resource that you might want to share with your students on why you're actually having them do some reflection. And so it's talking about the importance of reflection. In here, it talks about ways that students can identify goals and start planning. Talks about how, if you were creating a portfolio, what you would want to have in it. Talks about the different ways that you can organize it. Talks about the different features in here. And then it has a number of tip sheets. So again, the Learning Center is a good place for you to start, but also a place for your students to start. I like the what's happening piece, because this, as you start using PebblePad, this is where it lets me know that, oh, that workbook that I was working on, it actually has a new page available. So when the instructor maybe only had week 2, 3, and 4, the students, if they are in her course, they would get a note saying that, oh, now week 5, 6, and 7 are available. So this is all the things that are happening. And this is just a quick check on some of the reflections that they might have. So you might be wondering, so how does PebblePad know who's in my class? So if you go back to your Learn courses, you would, if you wanted to use it, you would have to go into go to Learn Help and ask them to add the PebblePad links. And what that does is create a corresponding workspace so that any student who is in your Learn course is also in the PebblePad workspace. And when you add your resource, your workbook that you want the students in your course to be working on, you add it to the workspace, and then only students who are in your course are going to have access to that resource. So that's how you are able to ensure that not everybody on campus sees your workspaces. It's just like Learn. If they're not in your course, they're not going to see your material. The other nice thing about it as well is if you are providing feedback or marks, if you're providing grades in the works in PebblePad, when you have it in your Learn course site, that grade gets generated and pushed into the Learn gradebook. So all your management of grades actually still takes place in Learn in that gradebook. It's not as if you have two areas that you're trying to coordinate. But again, we go into that in more detail in future workshops. This is the area where students might want to start adding evidence, so they can choose a file, they can drag files from their computer, they could add images, videos, whatever they wanted to work on. If you wanted to start creating those templates similar to the material that you saw in the examples, again, you would just go to the burger menu. You can go down here to get creative, and again, just click the link on I'd like to create a template. And this is where you will start adding the pieces. So I'd like to add a question that has radio buttons, or one that has checkboxes, or one that has drop-down menus. So all of that takes place again in the burger menu. There's the help area. You can always get in-depth help. You know, why would I use PebblePad? How can I create a template? And in here, there are all the instructions that basically walk you through step by step how to create templates. So we're going to give you about maybe about 5 to 10 minutes. Probably, I think we can give about 10 minutes to go through these various little videos. They're only 1 to 2 minutes. If you could mute your microphone. And just take a look to see what might be of interest to you. And it will give you a very short description on how you might use PebblePad to support the flipped classroom, for example. Or do your students have to design a research project? You could give it in there. Do you want them to prepare for tutorials a little better? How might you use PebblePad to facilitate that?